All right. So can I just have you start off by introducing yourself? You know what you do with the Jesuit ministries, what your role is, and your name, and long.
Yeah, my name is Joe Nolla. I'm a Jesuit in preparation for the priesthood, and I'm taking a little break between studies, which is something we do in our Jesuit formation for the priesthood. And this phase of formation is called regency. And so it's a time of maybe about 2 years or so, or maybe more, where it's full-time apostolic work. And my mission is to be here at Del Camino Jesuit Board of Ministries in the Rio Grande Valley. And it's one of the pastoral accompaniment of migrants on both sides of the border. I think it's called border chaplains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's amazing. Can you something that we didn't get a ton to ask Father Brian, I think, since you go to all of them. Can you kind of give a little description of all like the sites you visit? What you do in that sites. It's always relatively the same what you do in the sites, but describe the difference between all the sites you visit and why you're there.
Yeah. So there's like 2 pairs of cities.
Yes.
That we typically are involved in. We have the Brownsville, Matamoros, and then the Reynosa, McAllen cities. So twice a week we go to 2 shelters in Reynosa, and then 1 shelter in McAllen. And then on the other days, we'll go to a shelter in Matamoros, and then we also will go to a shelter here in Brownsville.
And can you just give us a description of each, like the Mediterranean Center, some of those, Casa Migrante, just like a quick little kind of explain what they are, what they do, and who it's.
Yeah. So the shelters in Mexico, whether it be Casa Migrante and Santa Tu in Reynosa or Pumarejo in Matamoros, they're more long-term kind of shelters. These are shelters where migrants will come while they're waiting for their CPP-1 appointment. So this could take anywhere from days to 8, 9 months. So people have to be prepared to stay there for a good long while in these shelters. Once you get to the U.S. side, the shelters there, for example, Ozanam in Brownsville, or the Humanitarian Rescue Center in McAllen, these are much more short-term shelters where people will usually be there mostly for just like no more than 48 hours, a week or so at the most usually. And this is just a kind of physical place to be while they finish up their arrangements and wait for their passage to the next city, the next location. Yeah. So it's a very different dynamic.
Yeah. Great. And can you describe some of the families, their situations they're in, how they might have gone to the border? Obviously, it's a very diverse kind of thing, but can you give a little overview of the type of people you find both in the shelters in Mexico and in the council?
Yeah, so they're going to be basically the same type of people.
Yeah.
It's just which step in the journey are they? Because you have to go back to is largely the motivation, like why they're leaving. And no one wants to leave their home country, where they have their roots, so with their family, their friends, culture, things like that. No one really wants to. So people can be kind of pushed out. And so what we basically find is that the people we minister to almost always are actually fleeing something. They could be fleeing, in some cases, poverty, but usually it's more than poverty. Usually it involves violence from the organized crime in their areas. In some cases, it can actually be persecution from the government that they're fleeing. These are very often families that we encounter, or some single adults that are trying to get to the United States, get established, and then bring their families over. Yes. But it's the situation in their country is usually pretty drastic, usually very violent, and that's what's going to push them to the north. Once they arrive at the northern border, though, things can get even worse. There's a kind of saying that's not uncommon for a lot of people coming from South America, say, for example, Colombia, Venezuela, or other countries. They'll say that they cross the Darien, which is this route going through the panel. They say the Darien was horrible, but Mexico was hell. And the reason for that is because, particularly in Mexico, local organized crime preys upon the migrants. And that is often, it's a form of kidnapping, usually. So in many of the shelters that we've been in, easily half or more of the people have been kidnapped. So it can be pretty depressing in some ways, but they carry on.
And I've experienced talking with some people who've had these horrible experiences, and from these horrible experiences comes a lot of trauma. I talked with Father Brian about this man, a man who described the worst pain he felt on the trip wasn't being beaten by the cartel. It was being told that his punishment was going to his brother and seeing his brother get beaten, right? Can you talk a little bit, with the ministry work and everything? How do you help these migrants work through trauma? What trauma do you see? How does that trauma impact your life? Can you kind of guide us through some of the trauma they experience?
Yeah, so the trauma kind of runs a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
You can directly suffer violence. So very often beatings, torture, rape. There's also an element of trauma when you witness that suffering to other people, or even just the threat that kind of suffering can be traumatic. So it's going to be different for each person. But as far as like how to kind of accompany the people in those moments, a lot of it is just kind of reading the room, try to read the situation, and just kind of take a bit of a boldness sometimes in like how to kind of respond. We certainly refer people to psychological counselors, but sometimes in a way you can be a kind of first responder, as far as like accompanying people. So I think of this was a few months ago in Casa Migrante. A gentleman told me about a 15-year-old Venezuelan girl who was in that shelter.
Mm-hmm.
She had been kidnapped. The rest of her family was still being held by the cartel. They could only raise the ransom for one person. And her family had their CBP-1 appointment in like a couple days. And so there was this question, should she go and be there for her appointment, or should she wait for her family? What are the consequences of waiting for her family? So I was asked to go talk. And I we were talking to say that you can wait for your family to be released, and all of you together will be able to go. Even if you pass the date of your appointment, CBP will still honor that appointment. So wait for your family. And she was listening, and she kind of nodded, but she was largely a little kind of unresponsive. Like there was like a wall that had been built up. Clearly her biggest concern was not, do I go to my appointment or not? Her biggest concern was my family is still being held by the cartel. And so just kind of reading that reality, and I took a risk, to be honest with you. I changed the subject. I said, you survived your kidnapping. You can't do that without some kind of fire, without some kind of interior strength. And that doesn't come from nowhere. You don't hear that. That fire, that's in the blood. Your mother has that fire. Your aunt has that fire. Your brother, your cousin, they have that fire. Trust in that fire. And the wall started to break down. And she began to cry. And just sat with her for that part of an hour. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes she'd want to talk about a little something, ask me some questions. I had some other Venezuelans sitting Mexico on the other side. They weren't part of this conversation. But I asked them some questions about, which Arepas are better, and then all of a sudden she had some opinions. So Skyra, let's get you in here, I kind of talk about the thing, get her to kind of, smile a little bit. And then over time, over the course of a couple of weeks, one by one, her family members started to get released. And her spirit started to get released. And then eventually, the whole family has been released. And seeing just the change in her spirits. Now, of course, our conversations continued. And they were able to make it to the bridge and be crossed. And then one day, when I'm in McAllen at the HRC, I'm setting up for Mass. I feel like this little tap on the shoulder. I turn around. It's her with her whole family. They made it to the U.S. safely, and it's this massive group hug kind of. I just barely didn't cry. I didn't cry though. I didn't cry. I held it together. Yeah, but no, it was this. It was a touching kind of denouement where something that began horribly was able to be kind of resolved. Like the whole family there smiled and happy. They'll still carry everything that happened. But the trauma doesn't get the last word. There's always a way forward. And that trauma will eventually be put in its proper perspective. And there can be real.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. Can I ask, I asked a question to Father Brian, and there was some really interesting responses. You've been here, right? You were kind of exposed to this new environment when you did your regency here, right? You were familiar, and you might have had some preconceptions. Looking out at the American public today, what do you wish they knew about the border? What do you wish they understood about the border and the migrants that are coming in that they don't? And that might frustrate you.
Well, easily the thing that most frustrates me is a kind of demonization of migrants. We use words like invasion, which means that an enemy is coming en masse.
Yeah.
So there's already that kind of demonization. Using blanket statements, they're all criminals. Well, I'll be honest with you, they're all working for the cartel. The people that I'm encountering are fleeing the cartel.
Exactly.
They're victims of the cartels. Okay? They want to come here. They want to make things. They want to work. They want to live a good life. They want to be able to be good contributing members of society in freedom. Because when they try to be good contributing members of society, where they're coming from, well, then they become victims of extortion. Then they become victims of all sorts of other crimes. And it often becomes like this, do I play the cartel's game? Or do I try and do the right thing? And if you're going to do the right thing, often means you have to leave. You have to escape. And that's what's happening. And so I feel like a little compassion is in order.
Yes.
And that a lot of the people that we're seeing are, the reason that they're here is because, in many cases, because they have their moral priorities. Right. It's kind of like, I am not going to be party to this system of violence, this system of crime and exploitation. No. And I'm not going to let my family be exploited and suffer for that. Better to leave that situation and hope for something better. And that actually is kind of admirable. I wish we could see that aspect.
Exactly. Yeah, that's amazing. You described kind of like morality and how these people are good, good-hearted, and I think something that is forgotten from the media is these people's faith. That's your whole life, right? These people's faith. Can you describe? Obviously, it's very difficult, but can you kind of highlight some of the faith that these people have?
It's Herculean.
Yeah,
it is. And it ties back to the trauma. The ways can hurt. So oftentimes people coming from, of course there's exceptions, but sometimes when we come from a position of comfort and dare say privilege, and then we are met with suffering, where suffering falls upon us, there can be this temptation to feel abandoned by God, to feel that maybe God isn't there for you, to despair, and the faith can crumble. What we see in many cases with the migrants is actually kind of the opposite. You have people who have suffered tremendously, horrible violence, and they're speaking about themselves often as, I survived this because God was there for me. So the fact of survival, the fact of pushing through the suffering and overcoming episodes of violence and suffering, they give that credit to God. They say, God was with me, and that's why I wasn't killed. God was with me, and that's why the worst didn't happen in these situations. And they find their faith strengthened. This kind of intimate encounter with this protective warrior God, if you will, who does not abandon his own. So it gets to the point where it inspires me, and I don't pray for suffering. I don't want to that suffering to happen, but I do pray to have the faith of someone who suffers greatly. They get some insights, from their faith.
Thank you. That is really beautiful. Can I ask, this is something you highlighted to us earlier in the week. Hey, there's a lot of Haitian migrants, especially in this part of the border, right? Just because, how kind of they trail on how they decided. Can you highlight some of the discrimination Haitian migrants might face?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of the things that have their root in not being able to build connections. Not a lot of the Haitian migrants speak Spanish. Almost none of the Spanish speakers speak Creole. Yeah. So there is a kind of a gulf in communications. And so what do you do? What do you work with? So what you end up working with more often than not is actually your biases. Whether they're conscious or not. And you act upon those biases. And very often that ends up resulting in double standards. For example, there was one day that we were delivering some supplies in a shelter in Venezuelan. And what often happens is, if you start opening up a box of say, cold weather gear in the winter, you can start off trying to have like an orderly distribution of people online. Yeah. Very often, it will develop people just grabbing what they can because they're desperate. Yeah, everyone does this. Yeah. I do remember this one time, a Haitian woman grabbing something, and this non-Haitian saying, "Look at this, a bunch of animals, just unruly." So everyone was doing that. Yeah. But the Haitian got singled out in this double standard, and it wasn't kind of like, hey, this is not the best, most orderly way of doing things. No, it was the blame wasn't based on wow, the blame goes to this situation of desperation, despair. The blame goes to their being Haitian. Exactly. So this is kind of this double standard is probably the most obvious kind of discrimination that they face.
Awesome, thank you. I wanted to ask, can you kind of explain how you got involved with the community ministries, how your process was with that, and kind of how you, this is a huge question obviously, how you think you've changed because of the work you've done here? Obviously, super big question. Maybe just hit on a couple of things, how you got involved and some of the changes you've experienced yourself in your development.
Yeah, well, my first involvement was 2 years ago. I just came here just as a visitor. So over the summer, I was curious about what was going on here. Didn't really have any kind of experience on the border. The fact that it was a kind of itinerant mission of people kind of going from one place to another and do mass here, and then we'll go over there, and then we'll go over there. That intrigued me, and so I wanted to visit. So I stayed here for a summer, and that was itself very eye-opening. But as far as like getting assigned here, that was not expected, really by anyone. My assignment for Regency of the Space I'm in was actually to teach a high school in Puerto Rico.
Oh wow.
But then there was a personnel shuffle. I got my mission letter and everything. I was in Creighton, at Creighton University, doing classes on basically how not to make a fool of myself in the classroom. As a first-time teacher, when I got a call from my provincial saying, "Hey, some things kind of came up. Quick change of plans. Could you go to Brownsville?" Yeah. And of course. Yeah. It was a wonderful summer that I had here when I was here 2 years ago. One of the best summers I've ever had as a gentleman. And then to come here, as a mission. It's like, yeah. Well, I mean, the obedience, I'm going to say yes. But also it was easy to say yes. And as far as how it changed, it's kind of what we talked about earlier. It's kind of the boldness. Sometimes there's part of maybe taking the risk of saying some things, like especially like in conversations like that story I told you about. What about the father side? Well, I didn't know her family. I didn't know nothing about the families. Normally, I wouldn't presume to say anything like that. But there was this kind of intuition saying, this is what the kind of thing you need to say. So being bold to learn to trust that intuition. Yeah, that kind of stretches. And then also, this kind of constant kind of keeping my head on the swivel. Like looking around and checking, all right, God. Who do I particularly need to be attentive to? Who are you placing before me? Like, I don't want to miss this person. So show me, God, who you want me to be with, the particular person I want you to be with. So it's this growth in trust and God guiding. This is the person. And being bold in those conversations.
That's great. Thank you so much. I wanted to turn it over. Max, Ms. Lane, do you have any questions? Maybe?
I asked Father Brian this, and last time we were here, I asked Sister Nolla this. You're doing such amazing, incredible work. Average American probably can't dedicate their life to coming to border and serving. So what, for the average person, what are some things that they can do to support your work and support migrants in general?
Yeah, I would say, well, there's a bunch of organizations that can be doing it too. But I would say probably more importantly, it's educating yourself, which is not easy because everything is kind of constantly changing. But educating yourself why? So that you can be that person who actually does kind of stand up. When you hear someone demonizing the migrants and saying inaccurate things about the migrants, you can have something to kind of back you up and say, actually, that's not the situation that I'm seeing. To be that person that actually can challenge some of these very harmful stereotypes and challenge this harmful language that is being directed towards migrants. And you can be that person to maybe little by little, change some minds, and allow people to expand their minds a little bit.
Thank you so much. That's great. I'm trying to think. Maybe. Can you? This is a great question, I think, to highlight some of the humanity of the migrants you spoke. Can you describe the difference in the tone in the shelters in Mexico compared to the shelters and the rescue centers in the United States? And kind of, can you describe some of the difference in the tone when you walk in? How are the people feeling? What are they telling you? Can you describe that difference?
Well, it's stressful.
Yeah.
The stress is just different.
Yeah.
That's mainly what it is. In Mexico, the stress is usually the stress of waiting, in particular that when.
Mm-hmm.
When will I be able to get to the US?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stress. And you're largely having to fight against making rash decisions, or giving into despair.
Mm-hmm.
On the US side, it's still very stressful, but the stress isn't so much of a when, because you're already in the United States, where it's not even so much as an idea of when will I get to my next place, but how. How am I going to be able to get the money to pay for a ticket to Austin or to Denver from the southernmost part of Texas? How am I going to be able to organize that travel? The person who's going to receive me,
Mm-hmm.
and my sponsor is no longer able to. So what do I do now? How do I get there? And things like that. So it's a different kind of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And because the shorter amount of time that people would be in the shelters in the US,
Mm-hmm.
it's a stress with a kind of urgency to it.
Yeah.
Like, I gotta be out of here soon. I have my first appointment. I have a court date that I have to meet. Or the shelter could very well kick me out if I overstay and don't have a ticket, if I don't have already paid for
Mm-hmm.
passage to the next place. So it's that kind of stress.
Yeah.
So it's two different styles of stress.
Well, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much. It's just so great, and the stories, the anecdotes were really touching. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for letting us join you across the border. We'll see you tomorrow. But yeah, thank you so much again for doing this. Coming into our setup, impromptu setup, and answering all these questions. No, it really means a lot. So thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you.
And you also have a TV presence.
Yeah, both of you.
Have you guys ever thought of putting your